Welcome everyone to Milfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 3 Episode 22. It's called A House Divided. So spoilers for the episode. And it's good to be back and talking about the machine and what Uncle Nolan's up to, the shady old git that he is. This was a solid episode, but I will say that I think it was more solid as a setup for the finale, which is obviously what's coming next, than it was maybe on its own, which isn't really that much of a ding, but maybe stands out just because typically I don't usually feel that way about the first half of like big two-parters in this show. Like even just going back to earlier this season, the episode before, like, you know, that ended on the cliffhanger of Carter and Reese having to go through the city, you know, the one that ended in her death. The episode prior to that, which set that up, was so engaging on its own, was so thrilling on its own. Whereas this one, it does just kind of feel like a lot of setup. It feels like there's a lot of waiting for things to kind of happen, right? A lot of the main plot with Reese and Shaw and Root is them mostly waiting for people to show up in a location, and as a result, you feel that, I think, a little bit in the pacing where, because all the characters are waiting for something to happen, and then even the sort of the B plot, if you want to call it that, which is Uncle Nolan talking to Finch, because that is just a stationary conversation that's not really necessarily going anywhere, it turns out that even that is waiting on Vigilance showing up to get them, like, because they eventually go there as well. So it kind of feels like everything in the episode is waiting for them to intervene to actually to get to the things we actually we're going to build up to. And I think that does hurt the pacing a little bit, and just overall how satisfying this is as a sole individual chapter. That said, though, the things that it sets up and what it leaves us off on for next time, I think is pretty fun, pretty exciting, and I'm excited to see where we go with this. Particularly this idea that Finch is going to be tried, quote unquote, with the others, with the senator, with Control, with a couple other people from the government. The idea that the Vigilance are going to try them all together as a group for the surveillance and of course the machine, and all these ideas that they've been rallying against this whole season. The idea that Finch has to sit with them when he created this is kind of an interesting dynamic, because yeah, he is kind of, you know, good or bad, he is somewhat guilty for the thing that they are fighting against. Whether or not you agree that they should be fighting against it is another question, but yeah, honestly, probably the most interesting stuff for me in this episode was the conversation between Finch and Uncle Nolan. Mainly just hearing Finch talk about the machine in a couple of slightly different lights. And I do mean slightly, because by this point in the show, we're at the end of Season 3, we've had so many conversations about the machine, we've had flashbacks about how Finch feels about the machine, how he felt about it when he created it, why he did what he did by kind of handicapping it, and so on. Here he gets a bit more blunt about it, though, and a bit more direct about how he was legitimately concerned of what the machine could be if it decided that humans in general, if there wasn't a level of control, if he didn't try and rein it in, that it might just decide that humans as an entire species are irrelevant. Which is funny, because as the sci-fi fan that I am, immediately makes me think of Skynet. Because that's what Skynet did, and launched all the nukes, and then the Terminator happens, right? That's very much that. And when he's trying to say to Uncle Nolan, you can't launch Samaritan, it's going to be a problem to give it completely just unfiltered access and have no, you know, strength or like, because I mean, the hell, Uncle Nolan even says he has no desire to control it. He's just he's too excited about just all the information that it's going to be, without any kind of, you know, mystery puzzles of the numbers or anything like that. It's how he sells it to the senator and so on. But I think that fear of Finch is interesting. I like it from just like I say, like as a Terminator fan, I enjoy this idea of the threat of the computer that's going to decide that humans aren't worth the trouble and become a threat. But one of the things that I love about this show in general, from pretty much its conception, or at least early enough on when it started properly hinting how the machine was, maybe by the start of Season 2, when it really started to feel like we were treating the machine like an entity that was alive in some way, and started talking about what the moral and ethical implications are of not existing in terms of a surveillance device, but of how Finch treated it, and the idea that we feel sympathy for it because of how Finch kind of maybe mistreated it as a father, even though he had his reasons. And I think what's so interesting to me about the machine is that right from the get-go, it kind of was in my head a good version of Skynet. It's like, it's a Skynet, but it's a Skynet with compassion that for some reason has learned to care about humanity, maybe because he's learned it from Finch, despite Finch's efforts to try and cut it off from emotions, and so on. And Finch even admits in this episode that some of that was out of his control, that he couldn't really account for in combat its growing ideas because it's so smart and it's growing and it's expanding. So there's something kind of beautiful to me that he was worried about the machine becoming Skynet. Not that he ever phrased it that way, but that's how I'm phrasing it. But ultimately, he needn't have worried in a sense because he kind of taught it right from wrong in the first place. And it's kind of further emphasizing the idea of the need for a parental figure, the need for guidance, the need for someone to look up to and give you a sense of a, just a direction of right and wrong. And that's like a theme that the show has constantly came back to time and time again. And obviously, another big one is redemption and making up for your mistakes and all that. But, there's been so many plots where Reese has had to kind of, be like a father figure to someone. Even Finch got to do that in the high school episode last season. It's a recurring theme that does keep coming back. And I think this idea, if you compare this to just being a parent and the idea that you're scared that your child is going to be a nightmare, is going to be like a monster, and you maybe like get too harsh and try and like lock them down effectively, only to find out that when it does break out and get free, it's not to do the bad things you were worried that the child was going to do. It's actually got really noble ideas and is a better person than you could have ever imagined. There's I think that's what makes this scene or these scenes so compelling when Finch is talking about the machine this way, and in this case particular when he's talking to Uncle Nolan, is there's a really great mix of, I understand Finch's reasoning and I think it's kind of forward thinking and smart and sympathetic why he's done what he's done, but it's also really satisfying that he's kind of wrong as well. That the machine has maybe proven him wrong or will continue to prove him wrong. And, I do think that one of the most satisfying things that could happen in this show is Finch admitting to the machine or apologizing to the machine in some form, based on everything he said about it up until this point, or as he continues to will do so, perhaps, until maybe near the end of the show. There's layers there. There's layers where Finch is not a monster by any stretch, but he's kind of wrong. And it doesn't make Uncle Nolan right. Uncle Nolan's clearly off the rocker in terms of just how much he's willing to hand over control to this machine. He's not concerned with various things. It's, to me, that was the most fascinating thing in this episode, because it's again cutting to that core idea of the machine and what it means to Finch, and what Finch maybe meant to it, and just kind of the outcomes that have happened from that. Other than that, though, I mean, it's not that there's no fun stuff this episode. I mean, the plot largely revolves around the senator enlisting control to help sell the idea of Samaritan to the president's aides, and they're meeting in a hotel. Shaw is sent there quite quickly by Root. There's a lot of Roots that could, running the show this episode. Running the show, you might even say. But she's running the show this episode, and she gets Shaw there to keep an eye on things. And Shaw keeps saying, can I just go and shoot Control because she's evil? She's terrible. And it's like, no, she's one of the numbers we got. But they don't even get numbers until a good chunk into the episode. They don't have numbers. The machine can't figure out who's at risk because the targets potentially are too good at hiding themselves because they know the machine exists. But it turns out to be Control, the senator, and Uncle Nolan even is one of them, which is kind of why they end up being worried about Finch again. Because that's something I'm not even mentioning. Finch obviously was taken by Uncle Nolan last episode. That was the whole trade from before. And the team want to get him back, and that's what they care about at first. But Root kind of says, hey, he's not in any imminent danger, but the machine's got stuff for us to do that's important. So, and then that ends up blowing up in her face a little bit, and even the machine's face, because the machine couldn't have predicted this, but one of the numbers is Uncle Nolan, and that means that Finch as well is in danger. Vigilance weren't expecting him to be there, but Collier is like, hey, I love that you're here too. I am going to involve you in all of this. So, there's that. The actual stuff at the hotel is fine. I mean, obviously it's kind of fun that Vigilance cause like the entire power of Manhattan to go out with a virus. I don't know if we played too much with that this episode, and I don't even know how much we'll play with the next episode, because it feels like our concern getting in the next one is going to be more this televised trial that they're doing of the people behind the machine and the heavy surveillance. Another factor going on in here is the nerds from the prior episodes who Root is enlisted to help do stuff with those servers she stole, those Samaritan servers. Now, what they're going to do with them and what they did to them in this episode in the background, where they were working on something all episode, she says at one point they're going to try and slow Samaritan down. So I assume this will be something that will hinder its performance when it comes online, perhaps, to buy them some time, to maybe give the machine a chance to fight back or something. I don't know. But I'm curious. I like bringing these characters back. I liked one of them being shared a Reese. That was funny. And it was kind of nice to kind of include some of these characters. One of the things that I kept saying back in season 1, and it never happened as much as I thought it would actually, is there was a couple of characters that felt like it could be big allies when the time comes for it. Like there was one episode where Reese helped like a judge whose son was in danger. And I thought, oh, I mean, he might come back and be like someone who can just give them access to something later, or maybe, I don't know, circumvent something with his position of power. And it still never kind of came back up, and I'm not really expecting it to now. I was kind of expecting it later that season. If anything, this one's a bit more surprising, but it does make sense that you'd get a bunch of computer nerds to help with all the computer stuff. So I have no complaints with that side of things. So that stuff's going on. So there's a lot of moving things happening in this episode, but it's definitely a lot of things where there was never any intention to pay most of it off by the end of the episode. And the end of the episode is, of course, this trial that Collier's running for Vigilance, and it does make you wonder: is Finch's face going to be on TV? Are the public going to see who he is? Are they going to understand some of what's happened here, or are they going to find a really inventive way to make sure that doesn't happen? I don't know, but I am very deeply curious. The action's fine for the most part. It's not like a standout for the action. I suppose the other big thing about the present day stuff is that because Control's one of the victims that's taken by Vigilance at the end, Hirsch shows up, and Hirsch and their two main characters, that being Reese and Shaw, have to form an Uneasy alliance, which is entertaining. It's a little bit funny watching Shaw not want to lower her gun, them being a little bit petty about who's going to drive. This is the sort of fun thing you can do in a long-form TV show where you can have former enemies have to work together, and it kind of changed the dynamics of the relationship a little bit. Where this is going to go next episode, given that Hirsch had traditionally been this threat to everyone in the show, I'm not sure. But it is a finale next time. I could see some characters dying. None of our main team, I don't expect, but I think Hirsch could die. I think Control could die. I think the Senator could die. I think Collier's likely probably going to die, so he's dealt with. Maybe not. Maybe a little bit more for him next season. Which ultimately, that leads us into the other main thing I've not spoken about in this episode, and that is his flashbacks. He gets the flashbacks this episode. And it's interesting for me watching these, because one of my main critiques of this season, which has been a very, very excellent season by and large, right? I think there's a strong case that this is the best season of the show so far. But the one nitpick I kind of had is that Vigilance throughout a lot of this season felt a little bit weird and just kind of ancillary to me to the other threats that were going on. It kind of felt like they showed up at just inopportune moments, so there was more bad guys to shoot, and they never really felt like they accomplished that much. And it is a little bit strange getting into the final chunk of the episodes here at the end of the season, and all of a sudden we kind of have to take them a little bit more seriously. The episode where they killed the person of interest right at the start was a good way of making them feel like more of a threat, for sure. Because up until that point, they kind of feel like fodder. Yeah, they've got a leader, but they feel like a bunch of red shirts more than anything. So it was interesting coming into this, because this is them trying to flesh out their leader, Collier, and give you a bit of his backstory. We go back to 2010 when he was studying at law school to be a prosecutor. So he was going to be part of the system. He was. And we get the story of his brother, who was a recovering alcoholic, who'd been sober for almost 2 years, had separated from his wife, the brother that is, not Collier, and, well, his name would be Collier too, I presume, but you know what I mean, not the one that we've been following. And out of nowhere, his brother is arrested, and there's no reasons given because of national security. They're allowed to do it under whatever act. And as someone who's trained to be a lawyer, obviously Collier gets quite upset about this and wants to try and get to the bottom of it. And we see him be told that there's photographs, numerous photographs of his brother and someone who is cousins with an extremist, leader of some kind, right? He kept meeting up with a cousin, and because his brother's job's in what did they say? Was it aircraft maintenance? It was something to do with planes. It was something to do with aircrafts. They're like, hey, he's a suspect. He's a person of interest. We're just holding him. And then the tragic thing that happens is that his brother kills himself in prison. And so we cut to like a funeral scene, and it's all very sad and dour. And his son is like upset. His ex-wife is upset and partially blames herself for separating with him. Maybe she drove him to whatever he did. So it really sort of lays it on thick, the tragedy of all this. And then Collier runs into this guy that was in the photographs, this person who was suspected of being a terrorist because he's cousins with someone who's definitely one. And it turns out this guy also went to Alcoholics Anonymous. He was his sponsor. And he gives him his 2-year chip, the little chips they get for like sobriety. I can't say that word, never mind. You know what I'm saying? He was sober for 2 years. He gives him these little chip, and he explains that, oh yeah, your brother was there for me. He got me out of some jams. He was, he was a great sponsor, and I wish I could have been there for him. And he even sort of drops mention to, oh yeah, I was being questioned for a while because of some distant family member that I've never met. And it kind of like paints a picture that, oh, all of this nonsense of he's been associating with someone in a terror group is complete nonsense. And it was just like a mistake, but it led to his brother doing what he did in prison, and now he's not here anymore. So we get another scene where Collier's angry and demanding answers and saying this is a bunch of nonsense. Like, my brother was not a goddamn terrorist. Like, he was innocent, and this system did this to him. And it's cool, we don't really see anything beyond that scene, but it's just kind of setting up this was his motivation, and it's why he hates surveillance, and it's kind of the seed of that, the seed of why he hates the police state and not even the police state, but the surveillance state, I think is what I meant to say. And I think it's decent enough. It's like, it makes enough sense. I will say that maybe it feels a little late in the season for this, or maybe because Vigilance have felt a little undercooked to me for a lot of the season, this isn't quite enough to completely buy into them as an exciting threat. I like what they're doing in this episode, and I like the position they force Finch and even Uncle Nolan. The fact that Finch and Uncle Nolan are both sitting and being accused on the same table is really interesting, given that we know as the audience, we've been watching that they're on very different sides of things. But having them put in this position, I think, is fascinating, and I think that's really what Vigilance maybe was designed for, is to get to this point. I don't know if personally being that engaged with Collier or the group as an entity is something that I'm sure they wanted us to feel engaged with them and see them as like a big threat. But I think when I compare them to HR, I compare them to Uncle Nolan's group, Decima, I compare them to any of the groups that we've had up until this point, I think them as an entity are the least interesting as far as characters go. But I think the position they've put our main characters in is really fascinating. So I think the finale is going to be really good, and I think it's going to pay off on what this is set up here, and I'm excited to get to that for sure. But I don't know if it's quite, done to this group what previous villains have been able to achieve in terms of being someone that I'm actually really excited to see like be taken down a peg or two or be defeated. And arguably there's maybe more of a nuanced like ending to this where maybe Collier like ends up, I'm not necessarily siding with Team Machine, I don't see that happening, but maybe like sort of realizing there's like a lesser evil or something, it's, I don't know, maybe not, maybe he'll just go out in a blaze of glory next episode because they have to save Finch and he's in a threatening position or something, I don't know, but there's obviously thematic things there to the group and what they're doing. I just don't know if, because they spent so much of this season just feeling kind of like a group of red shirts who shows up to make action scenes a bit more full of people to shoot. I don't know if I ever quite felt invested in them and felt like I was building. I think it's partly because they were already just this group that was running around established and showing up to things. I think if they teased them in a way where maybe they'd pulled off something kind of impressive first, and then we started seeing them show up, it might have been more exciting. But we already had so many villains to juggle at the start of the season that maybe that was the casualty of that, is that because we still had to deal with so much, but we're still doing HR stuff until halfway through the season. Maybe that's the casualty here, is that the Vigilants didn't get maybe the greatest introduction into their things, and it's hindered them a little bit, even now at the end. Even though I think they're better than they were, I still am not like super engaged with them as a group. But like I say, I'm excited about this trial, and I'm excited about the position that they've forced everyone into, and I think what could come out of these conversations could be like, like some of the best stuff of the whole show, potentially, depending on how this is written the next episode. So we'll see how it comes out, we'll see how it lands, and I'll be back with that soon. I promise, actually, soon. I've been missing Person of Interest dearly. I honestly, new shows kind of got in the way of things for a little bit there. I was missing X-Files as well. So happy to be back. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support all the content via Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or YouTube membership. That's also a valid way of doing it, or a super thanks for a one-time thing. Any support is greatly appreciated and helps keep reviews coming both here and over in MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. Go check out that. There's a sci-fi movie podcast, might be relevant to your interests since you like Person of Interest. No pun intended, I didn't mean to say interest twice. Anyway, that's me. Thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?